Sarah Whitmore thought she'd buried the past along with her husband, but when his estranged brother Marcus returns to claim the ranch that's been her sanctuary for 5 years, old wounds tear open like fresh scars. In the unforgiving landscape of 1880s Colorado, where survival depends on strength and stubbornness, Sarah has built more than just a successful ranch. She's built a fortress around her heart. But Marcus Carson isn't the reckless young man who fled years ago. War has changed him, marked him, and he's carrying secrets that could destroy everything Sarah believes about her late husband. When corporate wolves circle their family land, Sarah and Marcus must choose between their bitter past and an impossible future. Because sometimes the greatest enemy isn't the one standing across from you, it's the one standing beside you. This is a story of second chances, buried truths, and the kind of love that blooms in the darkest soil. If you're ready for a tale that will grip your heart and never let go, stay with us. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. You can't just waltz back into my life. Bitter widow faces her dead husband's brother. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Whitmore ranch as Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool kitchen window. 5 years. 5 years since Thomas died, and still the ache in her chest felt fresh as yesterday's wound. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped onto the front porch. The Colorado mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their peaks touched with snow even in late spring. This land had been her refuge, her salvation, her everything. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A lone rider approached from the east, silhouetted against the rising sun. Something about the way he sat his horse, the familiar tilt of his shoulders, made her heart stutter. It couldn't be. The rider drew closer, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Even after 8 years, she'd know that face anywhere. The strong jaw, the dark hair now touched with silver at the temples. The eyes that had once looked at her was something she'd tried desperately to forget. Marcus Carson, her late husband's brother. He reined his horse at the gate, those penetrating blue eyes meeting hers across the yard. Time seemed to fold in on itself, carrying her back to moments she'd buried deep. The way he'd looked at her on her wedding day. The brief touch of his hand when he'd helped her into the carriage. The goodbye that had felt like a death. Sarah. His voice was deeper now, roughened by years and experiences she couldn't imagine. He dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg, and she noticed the careful way he moved. War had marked him. Marcus. She kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. I wasn't expecting you. I would have written, but he gestured vaguely as if words were foreign things. May I come up? Part of her wanted to slam the door to pretend this was just another nightmare. But she was Sarah Whitmore now, not the uncertain young woman who'd watched him ride away. She was stronger than her memories. I suppose. He climbed the porch steps with that same measured care, and she caught the faint scent of leather and sage that had always clung to him. Up close, she could see the changes more clearly. Lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, a thin scar along his jaw, hands that looked like they'd seen too much violence. You look well, he said quietly. You look tired. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she cursed her traitorous heart for still caring. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's one way to put it. They stood there in the awkward space between strangers and something they'd never been allowed to be. Sarah cleared her throat. Coffee? I'd be grateful. She led him into the kitchen, hyper-aware of his presence behind her. Everything felt too small, suddenly too intimate. She'd entertained neighbors' ranch hands, even the occasional traveling preacher in this room. But having Marcus here felt like inviting a storm indoors. Nice place, he said, taking in the clean surfaces, the carefully tended details. You've done well for yourself. Thomas and I built a good life here. She emphasized her dead husband's name deliberately, a reminder of the boundary between them. Marcus nodded slowly. I heard about Thomas. I'm sorry I couldn't make it back for the funeral. The war. It wasn't really a question. Among other things. He accepted the cup of coffee she handed him, their fingers brushing for just an instant. Sarah, I need to talk to you about something important. The serious tone in his voice made her stomach clench. What is it? The railroad. She set down her own cup harder than necessary. What about the railroad? They're making offers on land along this valley. Big offers. And there are rumors. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Rumors that they're not planning to take no for an answer. Sarah felt the familiar fire rise in her chest. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let anyone take this ranch from her. Let them try. This land isn't for sale. I figured you'd say that. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. But Sarah, these aren't just business negotiations. There's talk of forced acquisitions, legal challenges to property ownership, especially for widows. Her voice turned sharp as broken glass. For people without powerful connections. The implication hung between them like a loaded gun. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, her ranch hands were beginning their morning chores. Jim Peterson, her foreman, was checking the fence line in the near pasture. Everything looked normal, peaceful, secure, but she'd learned not to trust peaceful moments. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked without turning around. "Because Thomas would have wanted me to look after you." "Thomas is dead." The words came out harsher than she intended. "And I don't need looking after." "I know that, but I also know what this place means to you." She whirled to face him. Do you really know what this place means to me?" Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or something deeper that she didn't want to name. "It means everything," he said quietly. "It's your home, your sanctuary, the place where you built a life with my brother. The life I built after you left." The accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I had my reasons for leaving." "I'm sure you did." The front door burst open, preventing whatever he might have said next. Jim Peterson's weathered face appeared, his expression grim. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've got trouble." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "What kind of trouble?" "Riders coming up from the south, 5 of them moving fast, and they're armed." Marcus was already rising from his chair, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip. Sarah noticed the practiced way he positioned himself between her and the door. "Expecting company?" he asked. "Never the kind that comes armed." Sarah moved to the window, pulling aside the curtain just enough to see outside. In the distance, dust clouds marked the approach of the riders Jim had mentioned. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jim continued, "there's something else. One of the riders is carrying what looks like legal papers." Sarah felt her world tilt sideways. The railroad. It was starting already. "Jim, get the other hands together. Tell them to stay close to the barn, but don't make any aggressive moves unless I give the word." "Yes, ma'am." Jim hesitated, glancing at Marcus. "Should I ask who your friend is?" "Marcus Carson," Marcus said, stepping forward. "Thomas Whitmore's brother." Jim's eyebrows shot up. He'd worked for the ranch long enough to know the family history, or at least the parts that mattered. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you were dead, Mr. Carson." "Close enough," Marcus replied grimly. "Jim, how many ranch hands does Sarah have?" "4, counting myself." "Why?" "Because 5 armed riders suggest they're expecting trouble." Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. These men depended on her for their livelihood. This ranch was more than just her home. It was their home too. "I can handle this," she said firmly. "I don't doubt it," Marcus replied. "But you don't have to handle it alone." Before she could object, the sound of hoofbeats filled the yard. The riders had arrived. Sarah straightened her shoulders and walked to the front door. Through the screen, she could see 5 men dismounting from their horses. 4 wore the practical clothes of working men, but the 5th was dressed in an expensive suit that had no business on a ranch. The man in the suit approached the porch, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Jeffrey Callahan, representing the Colorado Central Railroad Company." Sarah pushed open the screen door but didn't invite him up onto the porch. "Mr. Callahan, I have some documents here that require your immediate attention." He withdrew a thick sheaf of papers from his portfolio. "Official notices regarding your property." "What kind of notices?" Callahan's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Mrs. Whitmore, the railroad, has a legal right to acquire land necessary for the public good. Your property lies directly in the path of our planned route through this valley. My property is not for sale." "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple." Callahan climbed halfway up the porch steps, and Sarah noticed the way his escorts moved to flank the house. These weren't just legal papers. This was intimidation. Marcus appeared beside her so quietly she hadn't heard him move. "Mrs. Whitmore has declined your offer." he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. I think you heard her clearly. Callahan's eyes flicked to Marcus, taking in the gun on his hip, the military bearing the steady way he held himself. And you are family. The single word carried implications that made Callahan shift uncomfortably. Sarah felt a strange warmth at hearing Marcus claim her as family, even knowing it was just for show. Well, Mr. Carson. Recognition dawned in Callahan's eyes, followed quickly by calculation. Sarah wondered what exactly he knew about Marcus and his past. Mr. Carson, this is really a matter between Mrs. Whitmore and the railroad company. Everything that concerns Mrs. Whitmore concerns me. Callahan held out the papers. Perhaps you should review these documents before making any hasty decisions. Sarah took the papers but didn't look at them. Mr. Callahan, this ranch has been in my family for 5 years. Before that, it belonged to my husband's family for nearly 20. We've built something here. We've made this land productive. We've created jobs for good men. And you think you can just ride up here with a few pieces of paper and take it all away? Mrs. Whitmore, I understand your emotional attachment. Emotional attachment. Sarah's voice rose dangerously. This is my home. This is my life. And you will not take it from me. One of Callahan's men shifted nervously, his hand moving toward his gun. Marcus caught the motion immediately. I wouldn't, Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried across the yard like a blade. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Sarah could see her own ranch hands gathering near the barn, ready to back her play. But she also knew that violence would only give the railroad more ammunition to use against her. Mr. Callahan, she said, forcing her voice back to civilized levels, you and your men need to leave my property. Now. Mrs. Whitmore, these documents give you 30 days to respond to the railroad's offer. After that, he shrugged the gesture, managing to be both apologetic and threatening. After that, what? After that, the matter will be decided by other means. The threat was clear. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists, but Marcus stepped forward before she could respond. Mr. Callahan, you've delivered your papers. Your business here is finished. Something in Marcus's tone made even the armed escorts take a step back. Callahan, to his credit, held his ground, but Sarah could see the wariness in his eyes. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore, I hope you will consider this matter carefully. The railroad is prepared to make a very generous offer for your cooperation. And if I don't cooperate, Callahan's smile turned cold. I'm sure it won't come to that. He tipped his hat and turned to go, but paused at the bottom of the porch steps. Oh, Mrs. Whitmore, you might want to ask your family about his recent business dealings with certain mining interests. I think you'd find the information quite illuminating. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah's eyes snapped to Marcus, who had gone very still beside her. What is he talking about? She asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words too bitter to swallow. Callahan mounted his horse, clearly satisfied with the parting shot he'd delivered. 30 days, Mrs. Whitmore. I do hope you'll make the right choice. They rode away as suddenly as they'd come, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of veiled threats. Sarah stood frozen on the porch, the legal papers clutched in her hands, her mind reeling with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Sarah, don't. She held up a hand without looking at him. Just don't. She turned and walked back into the house, letting the screen door slam shut behind her. Marcus followed as she'd known he would. You need to let me explain. Do I? She threw the papers onto the kitchen table. Do I really need to hear another explanation about why you've done something that's going to hurt me? It's not like that. Isn't it? She whirled to face him, all the emotion she'd been holding back finally breaking free. You disappear for 8 years. 8 years, Marcus. No word, no letter, nothing. And now you show up the same day the railroad decides to steal my ranch, and somehow you're connected to mining interests. What am I supposed to think? You're supposed to trust me. The simple statement hung between them like a challenge. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Trust you, I trusted you once, Marcus. I trusted you when you said you'd always be there. I trusted you when you promised you'd never hurt me. And then you left. I had to leave. Why? The word erupted from her like a gunshot. Why did you have to leave? What was so important that you couldn't even say goodbye properly? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar. Because I was in love with my brother's wife. The admission hit the air like a thunderclap. Sarah felt the world tilt under her feet, everything she thought she knew, rearranging itself into new terrible patterns. What? I was in love with you, Sarah. I had been since the first day Thomas brought you home. And I knew that if I stayed, if I watched you build a life with him, if I had to pretend that I was happy for you both, I would have done something that would have destroyed everything. So I left. Sarah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. All these years, she'd told herself that the feelings she'd glimpsed in his eyes had been her imagination, that the tension between them had been one-sided, that she'd been foolish to think, you love me, I still love you. The words hung in the kitchen like smoke from a wildfire, dangerous and all-consuming. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process what he'd just told her. Marcus, I know you love Thomas. I know you built a good life with him. I'm not asking for anything, Sarah. I'm telling you the truth. Finally. She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. The boy she'd known was gone, replaced by a man who'd been scarred by war and hardship and secrets. But underneath it all, she could still see traces of the person who'd made her heart race, even when she was wearing another man's ring. The mining interests, she said quietly. What's your connection to them, Ian? Marcus's expression grew shuttered. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the ranch that had become the center of her world. I own a silver mine in the mountains about 50 miles north of here. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. You own a mine. I bought it with my army pay and some other money. It's been profitable. How profitable? Very. He turned back to her. Sarah, that's how I knew about the railroad's plans. They're not just interested in running tracks through this valley. There's something else. What kind of something else? Silver. There are veins running through this entire area. Rich veins. The railroad wants to control the land so they can control the mining rights. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. And you knew this when you came here today. Yes. You knew they were going to try to take my ranch. I suspected. Sarah stood up slowly, her hands braced on the table. Get out. Sarah, please. Get out of my house, get off my land, and don't come back. You don't understand. I came here to help you. Help me, her voice climbed dangerously. You own a mine that's going to make you rich off the same silver deposits they want to steal my ranch for, and you came here to help me. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Marcus explained to me how this isn't exactly what it looks like. He was quiet for a moment too long. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. The mine isn't the only reason I came back. But it is a reason. Yes. The admission was like a knife between her ribs. Sarah turned away, unable to look at him anymore. 30 years, she said quietly. 30 years my husband's family worked this land. They survived drought and harsh winters and cattle thieves and everything else this country could throw at them. Thomas died believing this ranch would be here for our children, for their children. And now it's all going to be taken away so men like you can get richer. Sarah, it doesn't have to be that way. Doesn't it? She faced him again, and Marcus took a step back at the fury in her eyes. Doesn't it, Marcus? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the fix is already in. There are things you don't know about Thomas, about the ranch, about why the railroad is really interested in this land. Something in his tone made her blood run cold. What are you talking about? Marcus looked like a man approaching a cliff edge. Sarah, there are documents, legal documents about the original land grant for this ranch. What about them? They're not entirely legitimate. The words hit her like a physical blow. Sarah gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. What do you mean not legitimate? The original survey was falsified. The boundaries were drawn to include land that was never legally available for homesteading. Thomas knew about it, but he thought the paperwork had been lost in a fire years ago. You're lying. I wish I was. Marcus pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. I found this among some papers at the mining office. It's a copy of the original survey notes. The real ones. Sarah stared at the document as if it were a rattlesnake. Where did you get this? From a clerk who was cleaning out old files. He didn't know what he had. And you do. Sarah, according to this survey, nearly a third of your ranch was never legally Thomas's to claim. If the railroad has copies of these documents, they could take my land without paying me anything. The realization hit her like a landslide. They could claim I've been squatting on government property. Yes, Sarah sank back into her chair, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured balloon. Everything she'd built, everything she'd worked for, everything that defined her existence, it could all disappear on the strength of some surveyor's notes from 30 years ago. Why didn't Thomas tell me? He probably thought it would never matter. The original paperwork was supposed to have been destroyed. But it wasn't. No. Sarah stared at the document in Marcus's hand, afraid to touch it as if the contact might make it more real. What do you want, Marcus? Why are you really here? I want to help you save your ranch. How? By fighting the railroad, by challenging their legal claims, by making sure you get a fair price for any land you do have to sell. And what do you get out of it? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I get to try to make up for leaving you. The honesty in his words cut through her anger like a blade through silk. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd missed before. Pain. Deep, bone-deep pain that matched her own. Marcus, I know I don't have the right to ask for your trust. I know I left when you needed me most. But Sarah, I'm here now, and I won't leave again unless you tell me to. She wanted to tell him to go. Part of her wanted to scream at him to get out and never come back to leave her to face this crisis the way she'd faced everything else for the past 5 years. Alone. But another part of her, a part she'd tried to bury along with her husband, whispered that maybe she didn't have to face this alone. Maybe for once someone could stand beside her instead of behind her. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, and she could hear her ranch hands going about their morning chores. Normal sounds of a normal day, as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. The railroad, she said finally, they have 30 days to respond to their offer. Yes, and if I refuse, they'll try to take it anyway using whatever legal ammunition they can find, including this survey. Probably, Sarah stood up and walked to the window looking out at the land she'd called home for 5 years. Her sanctuary, her prison, her salvation. What do you propose? She heard Marcus move behind her, but he didn't come too close. Smart man. I propose we fight them. Together. How? I have money. I have connections. I have experience with mining law and property rights, and I have something they don't expect, which is a reason to care about this place that has nothing to do with silver. Sarah turned to face him, and for just a moment, she let herself see him the way she had 8 years ago, young and passionate and full of dreams that didn't include leaving her behind. And what happens when this is over? When we've saved the ranch or lost it? What happens then? I don't know, Marcus said honestly. I guess that depends on what you want to happen. I don't know what I want anymore. That's all right. You don't have to decide anything today except whether you'll let me help you. Sarah looked down at the legal papers scattered across her kitchen table. 30 days to respond to an offer she would never accept for land that might not even legally be hers. 30 days to fight an enemy with more money and power than she could imagine. 30 days to decide if she could trust the man who'd broken her heart 8 years ago. All right, she said quietly. You can help. Marcus nodded and she caught a glimpse of relief in his eyes. Where do we start? We start with the truth. All of it. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Because if we're going to fight this together, I need to know everything. About the mine, about the railroad, about why you really came back. All right. And Marcus, yes. If you lie to me, if you betray me, if you leave me again, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. A smile ghosted across his lips, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him all morning. I wouldn't expect anything less. The tension in the Whitmore ranch house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah poured herself a second cup of coffee, her hands steady despite the storm brewing inside her chest. Marcus sat across from her at the kitchen table, the legal papers spread between them like evidence of a crime. Start talking, she said. Marcus ran his thumb along the rim of his coffee cup, organizing his thoughts. The mine is called Silver Creek. I bought it 3 years ago from a prospector who didn't know what he had. How did you know what he had could experience? I learned about geology and mineral deposits during the war. We had to identify strategic resources for the army. Marcus paused. Sarah, the deposit under my land is connected to a vein that runs through most of this valley, including your ranch. My ranch sits on silver part of it. The richest part is actually under your north pasture. Sarah felt the irony like a physical weight. The land she'd fought to make productive with cattle and crops was worth a fortune for what lay buried beneath it. Does the railroad know this? They know about the broader deposits. I don't think they know the exact locations yet. Marcus pulled out a hand-drawn map. I've been surveying the area quietly, trying to understand the full scope. Sarah studied the map. Her property was outlined in red with dark lines indicating the silver veins. The concentration under her north pasture was unmistakable. This is why you really came back. No. Marcus met her eyes. I came back because I heard about the railroad's plans and I was worried about you. But the silver didn't hurt. Sarah, I could buy land anywhere in this territory and find silver. I don't need your ranch to be wealthy. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. What's your connection to the mining companies Callahan mentioned? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. There's a consortium of mining interests trying to buy up mineral rights throughout the territory. They've approached me about selling. And I've been stalling them, but they're getting impatient. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Are they connected to the railroad? I believe so. The Colorado Central has investors who own mining operations. They're not just interested in building tracks. They want to control the entire mineral wealth of this region. Sarah stood and walked to the window, trying to process the scope of what Marcus was describing. Outside, Jim Peterson was working with one of the younger ranch hands to repair a section of fence. Normal everyday work that suddenly seemed impossibly fragile. How much are we talking about? The silver deposit's conservative estimate, $500,000. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah gripped the window frame, her knuckles white. $500,000. Maybe more. And that's just what's accessible with current mining technology. She turned to face him. Marcus, that's more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. I know, and some of it is under my land. Yes, land that may not even legally be mine. Marcus nodded grimly. That's the real problem. If the railroad can prove your title is invalid, they can claim mineral rights to the entire property. Sarah sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the forces arrayed against her. What chance do I have, really? A better chance than you think. Marcus leaned forward. Sarah, I've been researching the original land grants in this area. The survey that's causing problems for your ranch, it's not the only one that's questionable. What do you mean? I mean the surveyor who drew up those boundaries was involved in a larger scheme. He falsified documents for dozens of properties throughout the territory, always in ways that would benefit certain mining interests. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. You're saying the survey itself was fraudulent. I'm saying the man who created it was corrupt. I've found records of payments he received from mining companies. If we can prove that pattern of corruption, we might be able to invalidate all of these surveys. That would affect more than just my ranch. It would affect hundreds of properties, which means we wouldn't be fighting this battle alone. Sarah felt her mind beginning to work again, moving past the initial shock to consider possibilities. You think other property owners would join us? I think they'd have to. If we can expose the conspiracy behind the fraudulent surveys, it becomes a territorial issue, not just a local land dispute. How do we prove it? Marcus hesitated. That's where it gets complicated. The familiar dread returned. Complicated how? The records I found are in the possession of someone who has his own reasons for keeping them secret. Who Partio? Charles Morrison. He runs the Territorial Surveying Office in Denver. Sarah knew the name. Morrison was a powerful man with connections throughout the territorial government. And he has the records. He has them. And he's been using them to blackmail property owners for years. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. He's part of the conspiracy. I believe so, but he's also our best chance of getting the evidence we need. Because, Marcus looked uncomfortable, because he's also being pressured by the railroad. They want him to validate their claims to mineral rights, but if he does, it exposes his own corruption. So he's trapped between us and them. Exactly. And trapped men sometimes make desperate choices. Sarah absorbed this information, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. What do you propose? We go to Denver. We confront Morrison with what we know. We force him to choose between helping us or facing exposure himself. And if he chooses exposure, then we take what evidence we have and make it public, create enough noise that the territorial government has to investigate. It was a dangerous plan with more ways to fail than to succeed. But Sarah had learned that sometimes the only choice was between fighting and surrender. When do we leave? You don't have to. When do we leave? Marcus studied her face, perhaps seeing something there that reminded him of the woman who'd tamed a wild ranch and held it alone for 5 years. Tomorrow morning. But Sarah, this won't be easy. Morrison is a dangerous man with powerful friends. So am I. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparations. Sarah met with Jim Peterson to discuss running the ranch in her absence. She arranged for supplies and made sure the ranch hands understood they might face more visits from railroad representatives. Through it all, she was hyper-aware of Marcus's presence. He moved around her property with the easy familiarity of someone who'd grown up there checking fence lines and talking to the animals as if 5 years hadn't passed. But she also noticed the way he automatically positioned himself, where he could watch the road the way his hand drifted toward his gun whenever a horse whinnied unexpectedly. The war had changed him in ways she was only beginning to understand. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah found him sitting on the front porch, staring out at the land that might not be hers to keep. "Regrets?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "About what?" "Coming back, getting involved in this mess." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The only regret I have is that it took a crisis to bring me home." "Home," he gestured at the ranch spread out before them. "This was always home, Sarah, even when I was 1,000 miles away." She understood the feeling. This place had saved her after Thomas died, giving her purpose when grief threatened to consume her. But she'd never thought about what it meant to Marcus. "You grew up here." "Until I was 16. Then my father sent me east for schooling." Marcus's expression grew distant. "I always planned to come back, work the ranch with Thomas, build something lasting." "What changed?" "You did." The simple honesty of it took her breath away. She'd known there had been tension between the brothers after her marriage, but she'd never understood the scope of what her presence had cost. "Marcus, I never meant—" "I know." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of the dying sun. "Sarah, I want you to know that I don't regret Thomas marrying you. He loved you. He was happy in a way I'd never seen before. But, but I won't pretend it wasn't hard to watch." They sat in silence as the stars began to appear. Sarah found herself remembering the early days of her marriage when Marcus would visit for holidays or brief stays between his business travels. There had always been an undercurrent of something unspoken, a tension she'd attributed to normal family dynamics. Now she understood it had been something else entirely. "The night before you left," she said quietly, after Thomas fell asleep, "you came out here to say goodbye. You remember." "I remember you looked at me like you were memorizing my face." "I was. And I remember thinking—" She stopped, uncertain if she should continue. "What?" "I remember thinking that if I hadn't already married your brother, I might have fallen in love with you." Marcus went very still beside his. "Sarah, I know it was wrong to think. I know it didn't matter. But I want you to know that the feelings weren't entirely one-sided. You loved Thomas. I did love Thomas, but that doesn't mean I didn't feel something for you too." The admission hung between them like a bridge over dangerous water. Sarah felt simultaneously relieved and terrified to have finally spoken the truth she'd carried for 8 years. "What do we do with that?" Marcus asked finally. "I don't know. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I needed you to know." Marcus reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her knuckles. It was the first time he'd touched her deliberately, and Sarah felt her breath catch. "Sarah, when this is over, don't—" She pulled her hand away gently. "Don't make promises about the future. We don't even know if we'll have one." "We'll have one. I'll make sure of it." The fierce certainty in his voice sent warmth through her chest. This was what she'd missed most after Thomas died. The feeling that someone else was invested in her survival, her happiness, her future. "We should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult." Marcus nodded and stood to go inside. At the door, he paused. "Sarah, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we find in Denver, you should know that coming back here fighting for this place with you, it's the most right I've felt since I left." He disappeared inside before she could respond, leaving her alone with the night and a heart that felt dangerously close to hope. The ride to Denver took most of the day. Sarah had made the journey several times over the years, but never under circumstances like these. Marcus rode beside her, alert and watchful, his eyes constantly scanning the trail ahead and behind them. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold meal. The conversation had been sporadic during the ride, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. "Tell me about Morrison," Sarah said as they prepared to continue. "He's been territorial surveyor for 15 years. Powerful connections in the territorial government, some say in Washington as well. He's known for being flexible in his interpretation of land bombs." "Corrupt, you mean?" "Carefully corrupt. He's never been caught in anything that couldn't be explained as honest mistakes or clerical errors." Sarah absorbed this information. "And you think he'll help us?" "I think he'll help himself, which might amount to the same thing." As they approached Denver, the landscape began to change. More settlements, more travelers on the road, more signs of the industrial development that was transforming the territory. Sarah found herself thinking about the forces of change at work everywhere. Railroads, mining, cattle ranching, farming. Her small ranch was just one piece in a much larger game. Denver itself was a revelation. Sarah had visited before, but always briefly and never with an eye toward the kind of power and money that moved through the territorial capital. The streets teemed with businessmen, politicians, miners, and railroad men, all pursuing their own versions of the American dream. Morrison's office was in a substantial brick building near the territorial capital. Marcus led the way through corridors filled with clerks and surveyors, maps and legal documents covering every available surface. The man himself was smaller than Sarah had expected, with thinning hair and soft hands that spoke of a life spent behind desks rather than in the field. But his eyes were sharp and calculating, and she could see immediately why he'd survived so long in territorial politics. "Carson," Morrison said, rising from behind his desk. "I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. Mr. Morrison, I'd like you to meet Mrs. Sarah Whitmore." Morrison's eyes flicked to Sarah, and she saw the recognition there. He knew who she was and why they'd come. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry to hear about the difficulties you are facing with the railroad." "Are you, Sarah kept her voice level. Morrison's smile was oily. "Of course. Property disputes are always unfortunate, especially for unprotected parties." The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah felt her temper rise, but Marcus touched her arm gently, reminding her to stay focused. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said, "we're here about the Fletcher survey." Morrison went very still. "What about the Fletcher survey?" "We know Fletcher was falsifying boundary markers. We know he was taking payments from mining interests. And we know you've been sitting on evidence of his corruption for years." "Well, those are serious accusations. They're serious facts." Marcus pulled out a folder and placed it on Morrison's desk. "Bank records, payment vouchers, correspondence, all documenting Fletcher's arrangement with the Colorado Mining Consortium." Morrison opened the folder and thumbed through the documents, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Where did you get these? Does it matter?" Morrison looked up at Marcus, then at Sarah. She could see him calculating odds, weighing risks, trying to find an angle that would keep him safe. "What do you want?" "We want the original Fletcher survey notes for the Whitmore Ranch, all of them. And in exchange, we don't take these documents to the territorial governor." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think Governor Mitchell would act against me? I've been doing favors for politicians in this territory since before you were born." "Maybe not," Marcus agreed. "But we wouldn't stop with the governor. These documents tell a story about corruption that reaches from mining companies to railroad interests to the territorial surveying office. There are newspapers in St. Louis and Chicago that would find this very interesting." Morrison's face went pale. "You're talking about destroying careers, ruining lives." "We're talking about justice," Sarah interjected. "Mr. Morrison, they're trying to steal my ranch based on fraudulent surveys. How many other property owners have you cheated over the years? How many families have lost their homes because of documents you knew were false? Business is business, Mrs. Whitmore. This isn't business. This is theft. And if you don't help us stop it, we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. Morrison stared at her for a long moment, perhaps seeing something in her eyes that reminded him that frontier women could be every bit as dangerous as frontier men. Even if I wanted to help you, he said finally, the original Fletcher notes were destroyed years ago. No, they weren't, Marcus said quietly. You kept copies, hidden copies, because corrupt surveys are only valuable if you can prove they're corrupt. Morrison's poker face finally cracked. You can't prove that. We don't have to prove it. We just have to make the accusation. Publicly. Let the investigation sort out what's true and what isn't. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Morrison walked to the window, staring out at the bustling streets of Denver. Do you have any idea what you're asking me to do? The Colorado Central Railroad has investors throughout the territory, mining interests, cattle barons, politicians. If I cross them, if you don't cross them, Sarah said, I'll make sure those documents find their way to every newspaper editor between here and Washington. Morrison turned back to face them, defeat written in every line of his body. The Fletcher notes are in my private safe, along with documentation of his arrangement with the mining consortium. Get them. Morrison walked to a large safe in the corner of his office, working the combination with shaking hands. He withdrew a thick folder and placed it on his desk. These are copies of the original survey notes for a dozen properties in your valley, including your ranch, Mrs. Whitmore. They show the actual boundaries, not the falsified ones that appear in the official records. Sarah opened the folder and found herself looking at maps and notes that told a very different story about her property. According to these documents, her ranch contained exactly the land that Thomas had originally claimed, from nothing more, nothing less. This proves the official surveys were falsified. It proves Fletcher was a fraud, Morrison corrected, but proving fraud and proving your legal ownership are two different things. Marcus leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean the territorial government has been issuing land grants based on the false surveys for 15 years. Even if you can prove fraud, the legal complications could take years to sort out. Sarah felt her hope deflating. You're saying it doesn't matter if we can prove corruption? I'm saying it matters, but it might not save your ranch. Not in time, Sarah. The setback hit like a physical blow. Sarah had pinned her hopes on exposing the fraudulent surveys, thinking it would end the railroad's threat to her property. There has to be something else, she said. Morrison was quiet for a moment, studying the documents spread across his desk. There might be, but it would require additional cooperation from Mr. Carson. What kind of cooperation? The mining consortium I mentioned. They've been pressuring the railroad to acquire mineral rights throughout your valley, but they need clear titles to move forward with development. So if someone were to acquire competing mineral rights claims, it would complicate their plans significantly. Sarah felt a spark of understanding. You're talking about filing competing claims. I'm talking about Mr. Carson using his mining expertise to file legitimate claims to mineral rights on properties throughout the valley. Claims that would take precedence over any rights the railroad might acquire through property acquisition. Marcus frowned. Morrison mineral rights claims require significant capital investment, and they have to be backed by actual mining operations. Which you have, Morrison pointed out. Your Silver Creek mine gives you the credibility and resources to file claims throughout the region. Sarah began to see the potential in Morrison's suggestion. If Marcus files competing claims, the railroad can't simply take the land and start mining. Exactly. They'd have to negotiate with him for access, or fight him in court for years. But why would you help us with this? Marcus asked suspiciously. Morrison's smile was grim. Because the mining consortium has been pressuring me to validate claims I know are fraudulent. If their plans get tangled up in legal challenges, the pressure goes away. And you stay safe. We all stay safe. Sarah looked at Marcus, trying to read his expression. The plan Morrison was proposing was complex and risky, requiring Marcus to invest significant time and money in a legal strategy that might not work. What would it cost, she asked. Filing fees, survey costs, equipment for exploration. probably $20,000 to do it properly. The amount was staggering. More money than Sarah had ever seen, certainly more than she could contribute to the effort. I have the money, Marcus said quietly. Marcus, you can't risk everything on this. What's the alternative? Let them take your ranch. Let them steal silver worth $500,000. Morrison cleared his throat. There's one more thing you should know. The railroad's 30-day deadline. It's not arbitrary. They're planning to begin construction in 6 weeks, which means they need clear property titles by then. Construction of what? Not railroad tracks, mining infrastructure. They want to begin extracting silver by late summer. The timeline suddenly made sense. The railroad wasn't just planning for the future, they were preparing for immediate development. Which means we don't have much time, Sarah said. Which means we don't have any time, Marcus corrected. If we're going to file competing claims, we need to start immediately. Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Marcus was offering to risk his fortune to save her ranch, but the plan was complicated and uncertain. If it failed, they would both lose everything. Morrison, and she said, if we do this, if Marcus files these claims and we expose the fraud in the surveys, what are our actual chances of success? Morrison considered the question carefully. Against the railroad, alone 50-50. But Mrs. Whitmore, you wouldn't be fighting the railroad alone. If word gets out that the surveys were fraudulent, every property owner in the valley will have reason to join you. That changes the equation considerably. How so? Because then it becomes a political issue. Politicians don't like to be on the wrong side of disputes that affect hundreds of voters. Marcus gathered up the documents from Morrison's desk. Sarah, it's your decision, but I think this is our best chance. She thought about her ranch, about the life she'd built there, about the men who depended on her for their livelihood. She thought about Thomas and the dreams he'd had for their future. She thought about the silver buried beneath her land and the forces that wanted to take it from her. All right, she said finally, let's do it. Morrison nodded grimly. Then God help us all. The return journey from Denver felt different. Where the ride to the territorial capital had been tense with uncertainty, the trip back carried the weight of commitment. Sarah and Marcus had set forces in motion that could either save her ranch or destroy them both. Marcus rode with surveying equipment and legal documents secured in his saddlebags. Morrison had provided detailed maps of the valley's mineral deposits and the paperwork necessary to file competing claims. But success would depend on speed, precision, and no small amount of luck. Second thoughts, Sarah asked as they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek. Marcus looked up from the map he'd been studying. About a dozen, but I keep coming back to the same conclusion. Which is that doing nothing guarantees we lose everything. Sarah understood the sentiment. For 5 years, she'd built her life around the illusion of security, believing that hard work and determination would be enough to protect what she'd built. Now she was learning that sometimes safety required risk, that sometimes the only way to protect what you had was to bet it all. Marcus, if this doesn't work, it'll work. The confidence in his voice was reassuring, even if she didn't entirely share it. How can you be so certain? Because I've seen what happens when good people give up without fighting. And I've seen what happens when they refuse to give up. Marcus refolded the map and looked directly at her. You're not a woman who gives up, Sarah, and I'm not the man I was 8 years ago. That afternoon, they encountered the first sign that their plans might face unexpected complications. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, moving fast and with purpose. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. Friends of yours? Sarah asked. I doubt it. The riders approached with the confident aggression of men accustomed to getting their way. Sarah recognized the type from her years of running the ranch alone, men who assumed that authority came from intimidation. The lead rider was a tall man with expensive clothes and cold eyes. He reined his horse directly in front of them, blocking their path. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Vincent Hawthorne representing the Colorado Mining Consortium. Sarah kept her expression neutral. Mr. Hawthorne, I understand you've been to Denver recently, conducting some research into property matters. The implied threat was clear. They'd been watched, their movements tracked, and reported. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I wasn't aware my travel plans were of interest to anyone. Hawthorne's smile was reptilian. Mrs. Whitmore, the consortium is prepared to make you a very generous offer for your property. more generous than anything the railroad has proposed. I'm not interested in selling. Perhaps you should hear the terms before making such a hasty decision. Marcus urged his horse forward, positioning himself slightly ahead of Sarah. The lady said she's not interested. Hawthorne's eyes flicked to Marcus, and Sarah saw a recognition there. Mr. Carson, I understand you own a mine north of here. I do. Profitable operation. Profitable enough. The consortium has been hoping to discuss some business opportunities with you. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting. I don't think so. Hawthorne's expression hardened. Mr. Carson, I think you may be misunderstanding the nature of business in this territory. The consortium represents substantial interests, men with the power to make life very difficult for uncooperative property owners. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. Sarah felt the tension ratcheting up between the two men. Marcus had gone very still, his posture shifting into something that reminded her uncomfortably of a predator preparing to strike. Mr. Hawthorne, she said quickly, what exactly are you proposing? A joint venture, your ranch, Mr. Carson's mining expertise, and our capital and connections. We develop the mineral resources of your property together, everyone profits. And if I refuse, then you face the railroad's legal challenges alone, with predictable results. The threat was barely veiled now. Sarah understood that she was being offered a choice between cooperation and destruction. I'll need time to consider your proposal. Of course, but Mrs. Whitmore, time is a luxury that may not be available much longer. Hawthorne wheeled his horse around and rode away with his men, leaving Sarah and Marcus alone on the trail. Well, Sarah said after they disappeared, I guess word travels fast. Too fast. Marcus's expression was grim. Morrison must have talked. Or someone else knew we were coming. They rode the rest of the way in thoughtful silence, both of them processing the implications of Hawthorne's appearance. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Jim Peterson met them in the yard, his weathered face creased with worry. Mrs. Whitmore, we've had visitors. Sarah's heart sank. What kind of visitors? Railroad men. They've been surveying your north pasture for the past 2 days. Surveying, taking measurements, driving stakes, drawing maps. They said they had legal authority. Marcus dismounted quickly. Did they show you any documents? They did. Looked official to me, but I can't read legal language. Sarah felt the familiar anger rising in her chest. They're surveying property that doesn't belong to them yet. Mrs. Whitmore, Jim continued, there's something else. They've been asking questions about you. Personal questions. What kind of personal questions? About your financial situation, about your debts, about whether you have family who might contest any changes to property ownership. The implications were chilling. The railroad wasn't just planning to acquire her property. They were gathering intelligence to neutralize any resistance she might mount. Jim, gather the men. I want everyone here in an hour. Yes, ma'am. As Jim walked away, Sarah turned to Marcus. They're not waiting for our response to their offer. No, they're preparing for a legal challenge by building a case that you're not the rightful owner. And if they can prove financial instability or family disputes, it strengthens their position if they have to go to court. Sarah walked to the fence overlooking her north pasture. In the distance, she could see the wooden stakes the railroad surveyors had driven into her land. Each one felt like a violation, a preview of the theft to come. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. All right. Are we really fighting for my ranch, or are we fighting for control of the silver underneath it? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully measured. Sarah, I won't lie to you. The silver is valuable, more valuable than the ranch itself. But that's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? Because 8 years ago, I left the woman I loved to face the world alone, and I've regretted it every day since. The honesty in his words cut through her doubts like a blade through silk. Sarah turned to face him, seeing something in his eyes that she'd been afraid to acknowledge. Marcus, I know you love Thomas. I know you built a good life with him. But Sarah, he's gone, and we're here. And maybe we deserve a chance to see what we could have together. Even if we lose everything. Especially if we lose everything. The ranch hands gathered in the kitchen an hour later. Jim Peterson, Ben Rodriguez, Tommy Walsh, and old Charlie Hendricks, men who'd worked the land with her through drought and harsh winters, men who'd become more like family than employees. Sarah looked at each of their faces before speaking. Boys, you all know we're facing trouble with the railroad. What you might not know is how serious that trouble is. She explained the situation as clearly as she could. The fraudulent surveys, the valuable mineral deposits, the railroad's determination to acquire the property by any means necessary. Now, Miss, she continued, I want you to understand that this fight might get dangerous. If any of you want to find other work, I'll understand, and I'll make sure you get good references. Ben Rodriguez, who'd been with the ranch for 3 years, spoke first. Mrs. Whitmore, where would we go? This is our home, too. The others nodded agreement. Tommy Walsh, barely 20 and full of frontier pride, squared his shoulders. We're not going anywhere, ma'am. This is our fight as much as yours. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. These men could have found work anywhere, but they'd chosen to stay and fight for something larger than individual survival. All right, then. Here's what we're going to do. She laid out the plan she and Marcus had developed. Tomorrow, Marcus would begin filing mineral rights claims on properties throughout the valley. Simultaneously, they would approach other property owners with evidence of the fraudulent surveys, building a coalition to resist the railroad's expansion. It's going to be a legal fight, she explained, but legal fights can become other kinds of fights real quick. Everyone needs to be prepared for that possibility. Charlie Hendricks, who'd survived Indian raids and cattle wars, chuckled grimly. Ma'am, we've been prepared for trouble since the day we signed on here. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sarah was reviewing mining claims documents when she heard horses in the yard. Through the window, she saw 3 women dismounting from a wagon. Margaret Sullivan, who owned a small ranch 5 miles south, had brought her neighbors Emma Chen and Ruth Delaney. All 3 women had received railroad offers similar to Sarah's. Sarah, Margaret said without preamble, we need to talk. They gathered around the kitchen table, the mining documents pushed aside to make room for coffee cups and the weight of shared concerns. The railroad came to see me yesterday, Margaret said. They're offering twice what my land is worth. Which means it's worth 4 times what they're offering, Ruth observed wryly. Emma Chen, whose family had built a successful farming operation despite prejudice and legal obstacles, leaned forward. Sarah, Margaret tells me you have information about the original land surveys. Sarah explained what she and Marcus had learned in Denver, showing them copies of the fraudulent survey documents Morrison had provided. So our titles might all be invalid? Emma asked. Some of them, maybe all of them. The women absorbed this information with the stoic acceptance of frontier wives who'd learned to expect trouble from unexpected directions. What do you propose we do about it? Margaret asked. Fight together. Sarah outlined the legal strategies she and Marcus were pursuing. The women listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed their own understanding of property law and territorial politics. It's risky, Ruth said finally. If we fight and lose, we lose everything. If we take their offers, we get paid for giving up what's ours, Margaret interrupted. But Sarah's right. If we fight together, we have a chance to keep what's ours and maybe make them pay for trying to steal it. Emma nodded slowly. My husband won't like it. He believes in avoiding trouble with powerful men. Emma, Sarah said gently, trouble has already found us. The question is whether we face it together or alone. By noon, word had spread throughout the valley. Property owners began arriving at the ranch, some supportive, others skeptical, all of them worried about their futures. Marcus worked tirelessly filing mineral rights claims and helping property owners understand their legal options. His mining expertise and knowledge of territorial law made him invaluable in crafting a coordinated response to the railroad's pressure. But not everyone was convinced that resistance was wise. Henry Morrison, who owned a large cattle operation, stood in Sarah's kitchen arguing against confrontation. You're talking about war with men who own politicians, he said, men with more money than all of us combined. Henry, Sarah replied, they're going to take our land whether we fight or not. The only question is whether we make them pay a price for it. And what if they make us pay a price? What if people get hurt? The question hung in the air like smoke from a wildfire. Sarah understood his concerns. She shared them. But she also understood that some fights were worth the risk. Henry, my husband, died believing this land would stay in our family. If I give it up without a fight, what does that say about the value of his life? What does it say about the value of any of our lives? Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded grimly. All right. What do you need from me? By evening, they had commitments from 12 property owners representing nearly half the land in the valley. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough to make their resistance meaningful. Marcus found Sarah on the front porch as the last of the neighbors departed. She was exhausted but exhilarated, feeling for the first time in days that they might actually have a chance. "How are the filing going?" she asked. "Better than expected. I've been able to claim mineral rights to most of the properties where we found evidence of fraudulent surveys." Marcus settled into the chair beside her. "Sarah, there's something else." "What?" "I had a visitor this afternoon, Vincent Hawthorne." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "What did he want?" "He made me an offer, a very generous offer. For your mine, for my cooperation. He wants me to withdraw the mineral rights claims and publicly support the railroad's acquisition plans." Sarah felt the familiar dread settling in her chest. And in exchange, a partnership in the mining consortium, plus a guarantee that your ranch would be purchased for fair market value. How fair? $50,000. The amount was staggering, more money than Sarah could have imagined. But she also understood what it represented. 30 pieces of silver. Marcus smiled grimly. "Something like that." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." Sarah turned to look at him, trying to read his expression in the fading light. "Are you thinking about it?" "I'm thinking about a lot of things. I'm thinking about how much easier it would be to take his offer. I'm thinking about how much money we're both risking on a plan that might not work. And I'm thinking that some things are worth more than money, such as—" Marcus reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her knuckles. "Such as the chance to build something honest with the woman I love." The words hung between them like a bridge over dangerous water. Sarah felt her breath catch, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Marcus." "Sarah, I know we haven't talked about what happens after this fight is over, but I need you to know that I'm not here just to save your ranch. I'm here because I want a life with you. What if there is no after? What if we lose everything? Then we'll lose it together and we'll build something new together." Sarah felt tears threatening. For 5 years, she'd convinced herself that independence was enough, that the ranch and her work were sufficient to fill the empty spaces in her life. But sitting here with Marcus, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers, she realized how much she'd missed the simple intimacy of shared hopes and fears. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of losing the ranch, of trusting you, of believing in something that might disappear again." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Sarah, I can't promise that everything will work out the way we want, but I can promise that I won't disappear again. Whatever happens, we face it together. Even if Hawthorne makes good on his threats, even if this gets dangerous. Especially then." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders. She could take Hawthorne's money and disappear, start over somewhere else with more wealth than she'd ever dreamed of. It would be safe, practical, smart, but it wouldn't be hers, and it wouldn't be honest. "All right," she said finally, "together." The next week passed in a blur of legal maneuvering and careful preparation. Marcus completed the mineral rights filings, creating a web of competing claims that would take months for the railroad to untangle in court. Property owners throughout the valley organized themselves into a loose alliance, sharing information and coordinating their responses to railroad pressure. But the railroad wasn't sitting idle. On Thursday morning, Jim Peterson rode in with news that sent chills through everyone on the ranch. "Mrs. Whitmore, they've brought in hired guns." "How many?" "6 that I've seen. Maybe more. They're camped about 5 miles south near the old Peterson place." Marcus looked up from the map he'd been studying. "Professional gunmen." "They look like it, well-armed, well-paid, and not the kind of men you hire for conversation." Sarah felt her stomach clench. The conflict was escalating beyond legal challenges and property disputes. "They're trying to intimidate us," she said. "Or they're preparing for something worse," Marcus replied grimly. That afternoon brought confirmation of their fears. A messenger arrived with a document that made the railroad's intentions crystal clear. "Final notice of property acquisition," Sarah read aloud. By order of the Colorado Central Railroad Company acting under Territorial Authority for Public Development Projects. They're claiming eminent domain, Marcus said. What does that mean? It means they're arguing that the railroad serves the public good, which gives them the legal right to acquire property whether the owners want to sell or not. Sarah felt the ground shifting under her feet again. Can they do that? If they can prove their case in territorial court, and if they can ensure that no competing claims interfere with development. Which brings us back to the mineral rights. Exactly. If our claims are valid, they can't exercise eminent domain because the property is already committed to other development. And if our claims aren't valid, Marcus was quiet for a moment, then we have bigger problems than legal challenges. That evening, Sarah called a meeting of all the property owners who'd agreed to resist the railroad. The mood in her kitchen was tense, with several neighbors expressing second thoughts about their commitment to fight. I don't like the idea of hired guns, Henry Morrison said. This is starting to feel like a range war. It's starting to feel like theft, Margaret Sullivan replied sharply, and I don't intend to be robbed without putting up a fight. Emma Chen leaned forward. Sarah, what do our lawyers say about the eminent domain claim? They say it's weak but not impossible. If the railroad can prove that mineral development serves the public good more than private ownership, then they can take our land for whatever they decide to pay. Yes. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Ruth Delaney spoke first. So what are our options? Sarah looked around the table at the faces of her neighbors. Good people who worked hard to build something in this harsh country. People who deserve better than to be swept aside by corporate greed. We have three options, she said finally. We can take their money and walk away. We can fight them in court and hope our lawyers are better than theirs. Or we can make it clear that taking our land will cost them more than they're willing to pay. You're talking about violence, Morrison said. I'm talking about making them understand that we're serious. Margaret nodded slowly. Sarah's right. They brought in hired guns because they think we'll be intimidated. Maybe it's time to show them that frontier people don't intimidate easily. And if someone gets killed, Henry, Imawa said quietly, my family came to this territory because we believed in the promise that hard work would be rewarded with ownership. If we let them steal what we've built, what message does that send to our children? The discussion continued late into the night, but by morning the alliance held. 12 property owners representing nearly half the land in the valley committed to coordinated resistance against the railroad's acquisition plans. Marcus spent the next day reviewing their defensive options. The legal challenges would take months to resolve, but the railroad's timeline suggested they wouldn't wait for court decisions. They're planning to begin construction within 2 weeks, he told Sarah as they reviewed the latest intelligence, with or without clear title to the land. Can they do that? They can try, and then it becomes a question of whether anyone is willing to stop them. Sarah understood the implication. The railroad was betting that local resistance would crumble when faced with the reality of federal authority and corporate power. What do you think our chances are in court? Maybe 50-50 against hired gunmen. Marcus shrugged. That depends on how serious we are about fighting. That evening, Sarah found herself walking through her property as the sun set behind the mountains. Every fence post, every building, every carefully tended field represented years of work and hope. The idea of losing it all to corporate greed was unbearable. But the idea of getting people killed to protect it was even worse. Marcus joined her near the north pasture where the railroad's surveying stakes still marked their claim to her land. Regrets, he asked. A few, but not about fighting. What about, Sarah considered the question. I regret that it took a crisis to bring us back together. I regret the years we lost. I regret that we're facing this fight instead of building something new. We're building something new right now. Are we, Marcus gestured at the ranch spread out before them, then at the lights beginning to appear in neighboring properties throughout the valley. Look around, Sarah. A week ago, most of these people had never worked together on anything. Now they're standing together against forces they don't fully understand, risking everything they've built for the chance to keep it. You think that's building something. I think it's building everything. Community, trust, the foundation for something that can last. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. Marcus was right. Whatever happened with the railroad, they'd already accomplished something important. And us, she asked. What are we building? Marcus turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the last light of the dying sun. We're building the life we should have had 8 years ago. We're building the future Thomas wanted for you. We're building something worth fighting for. Sarah stepped closer to him, close enough to see the hope and determination in his eyes. Marcus, if we win this fight, when we win this fight, when we win this fight, what happens then? Then we get married. We combine our properties. We build the largest, most successful ranch in the territory. And we spend the rest of our lives proving that good people can win against money and power. And if we lose, then we get married anyway, and we start over somewhere else, together. Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his beard, the warmth of his skin. I love you, she said. I should have said it years ago, but I love you. Marcus pulled her close, holding her against his chest. I love you too. And Sarah, yes, we're going to win. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. On Monday morning, a convoy of wagons and armed men approached the ranch from the south. Railroad construction crews, backed by federal marshals and private security, had come to begin work, whether the property owners agreed or not. Sarah stood on her front porch with Marcus beside her, watching the approaching vehicles. Behind them, her ranch hands took defensive positions around the property. In the distance, she could see her neighbors doing the same on their own lands. The lead wagon stopped just outside her fence line. A man in an expensive suit dismounted and approached the gate. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Federal Marshal David Thompson. I have writs authorizing the Colorado Central Railroad to begin construction on this property. Marshal, you're on private property without permission. Ma'am, these writs supersede private property rights. I'm going to have to ask you and your men to stand aside. And if we refuse, Thompson's expression grew grim. Ma'am, I have a job to do. I'd prefer to do it without trouble. Marcus stepped forward. Marshal, we've filed legal challenges to the railroad's claims. Doesn't that require you to wait for court decisions? Mr. Carson, I have my orders. The court challenges will be resolved in due time, but construction begins today. Sarah felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could stand aside and watch everything she'd built be destroyed, or she could resist and risk a confrontation that might get people killed. Marshal Thompson, she said finally, this is my home. This is where my husband is buried. This is where I've built my life. You'll have to arrest me before I let you destroy it. Thompson sighed. Ma'am, I was hoping it wouldn't come to that. So was I. The marshal turned and signaled to his men. Federal agents began moving forward, preparing to remove the property owners by force. But as they approached, something unexpected happened. Riders appeared on the horizon from all directions. Neighbors, their ranch hands, even people Sarah didn't recognize. Within minutes, nearly 100 armed men and women had surrounded the railroad convoy. Margaret Sullivan rode up to the fence line, her rifle resting across her saddle. Marshal Thompson, you're outnumbered about 5-1. Maybe you should reconsider your approach. Thompson looked around at the assembled resistance, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. Folks, I'm a federal marshal. Interfering with my duties is a federal crime. So is stealing people's property, Emma Chen called out. Ma'am, no one's stealing anything. The railroad has legal authority. The railroad has forged documents and fraudulent surveys, Marcus interrupted. He held up a thick folder of papers. Marshal, we have evidence that every property claim in this valley is based on false documentation. That's a matter for the courts to decide. Then let the courts decide before you start construction. Thompson was clearly caught between his orders and the reality of the situation. 100 angry property owners were more than his small force could handle, and the legal questions were becoming increasingly complex. Or Carson, Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to contact my superiors for guidance. But this resistance is only delaying the inevitable. Maybe, Sarah said, or maybe it's changing what's inevitable. As Thompson and his men withdrew, the assembled neighbors gathered in Sarah's yard. The mood was cautiously optimistic, but everyone understood that they'd only won a temporary reprieve. What happens now? Henry Morrison asked. Now we wait, Marcus replied, and we prepare for the next round. Over the following week, the legal battle intensified. Territorial courts were flooded with challenges and counter-challenges, property claims, and mineral rights disputes, fraud allegations, and federal authority questions. But something else was happening as well. News of the valley's resistance spread throughout the territory, inspiring similar challenges to railroad acquisition plans in other regions. What had started as a local property dispute was becoming a territorial political issue. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Morrison, the corrupt surveyor who'd provided them with evidence of fraud, sent word that he was prepared to testify publicly about the conspiracy behind the falsified surveys. "He's scared," Marcus explained to Sarah as they reviewed Morrison's offer. "The railroad has been pressuring him to validate their claims, but if he does, it exposes his own corruption. So he's choosing to expose the corruption himself. He's choosing to get ahead of the story. By testifying voluntarily, he can claim cooperation and maybe avoid criminal charges." Sarah felt a spark of hope. Morrison's testimony could validate their legal challenges and undermine the railroad's claims throughout the territory. What does he want in return? Immunity from prosecution and relocation assistance. "We can arrange that." The territorial hearing was held in Denver 3 weeks later. Sarah and Marcus sat with their lawyers as Morrison took the stand and methodically destroyed the railroad's legal foundation. He testified about years of fraudulent surveys about payments from mining companies, to falsify property boundaries, about a conspiracy that reached from territorial officials to corporate boardrooms. When he finished, the railroad's legal case lay in ruins. The territorial judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The fraudulent surveys were invalidated, the property owners' titles were confirmed, and the railroad's eminent domain claims were dismissed. But the judge went further, ordering a full investigation into territorial land management practices and referring criminal charges against several railroad officials. As they left the courthouse, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "It's over," she said. "The legal fight is over," Marcus corrected. "But the real work is just beginning." He was right. Saving the ranch was only the beginning. Now they had to decide what to build with the victory they'd won. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the same front porch where she'd first seen Marcus returning from his 8-year absence. But everything was different now. The ranch had expanded, incorporating adjacent properties whose owners had chosen to sell to Sarah and Marcus rather than to distant corporations. The mineral rights Marcus had claimed were being developed, carefully providing income while preserving the land's agricultural value. More importantly, the valley had become a model for community cooperation and resistance to corporate overreach. Property owners throughout the territory looked to their example for inspiration in their own fights. Marcus appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the easy contentment of a man who'd found his way home. "Mrs. Carson," he said, handing her a cup. "Enjoying the view." Sarah smiled at the name she was still getting used to. They'd been married 2 months ago in a ceremony that felt like a celebration of more than just their personal happiness. "I'm enjoying the peace," she replied, "and the knowledge that this land really belongs to us." "All of us," Marcus agreed, gesturing at the neighboring properties visible in the distance. "That might be the most important thing we accomplished." Sarah understood what he meant. The fight against the railroad had created bonds between neighbors that went deeper than simple geography. They'd become a community in the truest sense, people committed to each other's success and protection. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked. Sarah considered the question, thinking about the years they'd lost, the struggles they'd faced, the risks they'd taken. "Just one," she said finally. "What's that?" "I regret that it took a crisis to bring us together, but I don't regret anything that's happened since." Marcus put his arm around her, pulling her close against his side. "Sarah, maybe that's how love works sometimes. Maybe we had to lose everything we thought we wanted before we could find what we actually needed." "And what do we actually need?" "Each other, this place, the knowledge that we're building something that matters." Sarah leaned into his warmth, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest like sunlight. In the distance, she could see the silver mine that had brought Marcus home, the cattle grazing in pastures that would remain theirs, the neighbors who'd become family through shared struggle. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she first came to this valley as Thomas Whitmore's young bride, but it was a life built on truth and commitment and the kind of love that grew stronger under pressure. "Marcus, yes. When you left 8 years ago, did you ever imagine we'd end up here on this porch, here together, married, successful, with a future that feels as solid as the mountains?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out at the land they'd fought to keep and the life they'd built together. "No," he said finally. 8 years ago, I thought leaving was the only honorable thing I could do. I thought love meant sacrifice, even if the sacrifice destroyed us both. And now I think love means fighting for what matters even when the fight seems impossible. Sarah felt tears threatening, but they were good tears, tears of gratitude for second chances and happy endings that felt earned rather than given. I love you, she said. I love you too. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Carson, and now no longer Sarah Whitmore, stood with her husband on the porch of the ranch that was truly theirs. They'd lost years to misunderstanding and fear, but they'd gained something more valuable than time. They'd gained the knowledge that their love was strong enough to survive separation crisis and the kind of pressure that destroyed weaker foundations. The silver beneath their land would make them wealthy, but the love they'd built above ground would make them rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. And in the growing darkness of the Colorado evening, surrounded by the sounds of their land and their life together, Sarah Carson finally felt truly at home. Thank you so much for joining Sarah and Marcus on their incredible journey from heartbreak to healing, from separation to second chances. If this story of frontier love, courage, and the fight for what's truly ours touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what resonated most with you. These tales of Western romance remind us that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding struggle, but from facing it together with someone we love. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories of love, redemption, and the unbreakable spirit of the American frontier. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of love to overcome any obstacle.